I start again. My time starts again. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to contribute to this debate. I remember the day 11 years ago when for the first time the Polish flag rose on one of the 3 new flagpoles at NATO headquarters, and also when some time before the Polish Prime Minister speaking to the NATO Council had simply and convincingly stated, "We want to join NATO for the same reasons that you do not want to leave it." Although the 1999 strategic concept is outdated, for years there was great reluctance to set about its revision, to open Pandora's box, as it were. A divisive process was feared, which bears the question, though, whether allies are not so divided on many subjects that a uniting effort is required in order to recreate unity, recommit and re-engage allies, regain trust in the world, and recapture public interest and support. It was already mentioned, and I can say in all modesty, 2 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall in January 1990, as a member of the Strategic Planning Branch in the International Military Staff, I was the first to dare to write on NATO paper the recommendation to revise MC 14.3, and was then closely involved in developing the 1991 and 1999 strategic concepts. From that I derived the impetus to argue for a new one early on. But after 2.5 years ago, I had proposed this, together with 12 topics for the necessary strategic dialogue among allies in a Frankfurter Allgemeine essay. Lothar Rühl, this nestor of German strategic thinking, growled in the same paper that many themes are not yet a subject, not yet a concept. That is granted, but the right questions must be asked, and much conceptual and diplomatic homework has to be done before pen should be put to paper in drafting. It must be acknowledged that not only with the disappearance of the unifying monolithic threat by the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact, forging joint decisions has become more difficult, but also that the cleavage dating from the Iraq crisis is not fully repaired, and that the alliance appears to some extent split between regional groupings with different security experiences and interests, those advocating a global orientation, others emphasizing NATO's regional character, several new members who, particularly after the Georgian War, insist on the priority of collective defense, and the southern allies focusing on dangers in the Mediterranean region. Also, we must be aware of 3 almost systemic changes. First, potential threats are not perceived the same way by all allies, and with operations of choice, as opposed to wars of necessity, different assessments, interests and preferences come to the fore. Second, NATO's dependence on other organizations and civilian actors has increased. And third, in our post-heroic societies, the readiness to sufficiently pay for security, to bear sacrifices, and to accept casualties has greatly diminished. On numerous themes important for NATO's policy and strategy in the future, considerable disunity prevails and potentially centrifugal forces loom. But if the debate produces fresh clarity on security policy within member countries, more honesty about divergent views and interests, and eventual greater unity and cohesion, then the process should be as important as the product and narrow down differences. Some main themes for this strategic dialogue, and it all has to do with the threat landscape. Purpose and role of NATO need to be redefined with a resolution of the schism between collective defense emphasis and expeditionary orientation, and a convincing explanation of NATO's now 3 main roles: protection of its member, further stabilization of Europe and its periphery, and peace missions out of area. Incidentally, these 3 roles correspond to the 3 phases in NATO's history. But in contrast to what some people think, the previous task was not wholly replaced, rather the new one was added. At the Prague seminar, I had the opportunity to talk about reassurance, meaning indivisibility of security, interest in the concerns of other allies, reliability of the protection of all member states. And all this also as a prerequisite for whatever else NATO does. It entails the need to overhaul the NATO system of crisis management in order to improve the preparedness to act as a matter of credibility. That overhaul should be done in the most neutral way possible and tous azimuts, as it were, avoiding an anti-Russia focus. Moreover, crisis identification, assessment and response procedures, as well as preparations, should be routinized and depoliticized as basic, normal, self-evident precautions of a military alliance against the unforeseen and unpredictable. And they must be given tangible expression. We heard that this morning already in planning, reinforcement and host nation support preparations, air defense and exercises. Furthermore, the relationship with Russia needs a new basis, requiring, in my view, a mutual learning process. That may be one of the most contentious issues. It is not about the CEE countries, quote, changing their perception of Russia, as the condescending statements in the West sometimes tend to go. No, Russia must abandon its Cold War cliches about NATO, give up 19th century geopolitical and strategic categories, renounce revisionism, fully embrace cooperative as opposed to confrontational and zero-sum security, and accept its neighbors' right to sovereignty, security and reassurance. The West and NATO, in turn, have some reason for self-criticism, having badly understood Russian political psychology, having somewhat mismanaged CFE adaptation, NATO enlargement and missile defense, and having made insufficient use of the NATO-Russia Council. But Russia, a signatory to the Charter of Paris, must be told which of its alleged security interests allies deemed justified and which not. Reassurance and reset or re-engagement are two sides of one coin. In the same philosophy as proclaimed by the Amel Report of 1968 or inherent in NATO's famous double-track decision of 1979. Thus, the strategic concept should send Russia a conditional offer for broad cooperation. Today's and tomorrow's security challenges call for an innovative approach and the awareness that the military is but one element of any solution. What threats the alliance is facing and how potentialities can turn into dangers, latent into patent threats as it were, must be systematically assessed. Regarding new security challenges, realistic analysis and conclusions are required concerning WMD proliferation, terrorism, organized crime, maritime security and piracy, energy security, cyber security, all of which imply limited NATO roles. The implications of the relatively new paradigm of human security and of the UN proclaimed responsibility to protect are important. NATO must also debate long-term trends such as the concurrence of globalization and fragmentation, the failing states, the cumulative effects of climate change, demographic shifts, food and water scarcity, the rise of new great powers, resource competition, religious radicalism, and think about how to contribute to what I would call preventive stabilization. For all this, NATO headquarters needs a strong, dedicated analysis capacity, and Article 4 of the Washington Treaty must be rigorously activated in order to bring about consultation that deserves this name. At the request